Gabe, I don't know if you have any travel booked here for the next few weeks, but I need to know if you'll be flying Southwest Airlines anytime soon.
So, Zach, I used to be pretty loyal to Southwest, and that was probably the airline that I flew the most. And then I started to realize that there's no benefit to actually flying Southwest really on a regular basis. So, I would say about 2 years ago, I switched over to United, and I have not been sorry about that choice at all.
I told you I'm a big Delta fan, but unfortunately, or I don't know if I should say unfortunately, but United is my hub, so I fly United the most. But I'm also very close to a Southwest hub. And as of this week, it sounds like they will be changing their baggage policy. Previously, Gabe, we talked about how they were going to be letting you pick your seats. And at the time, I was telling you, I was like, I've never flown Southwest, but now I'm interested. But now that they're going to be charging for bags, they're competing on. I almost said they're competing on speed and price, but they're competing on price just like every other airline now. So now the consumer in me just doesn't care enough to give Southwest a try. They've kind of lost their differentiation.
Exactly. They've lost their differentiation. It used to be that Southwest was quote unquote the fun airline and
Their
bags
stock
fly
symbol is
free.
LUV.
There you go, right? It's yeah, their planes have the big hearts on them, and they really leaned into the fun aspect of what they were trying to do. And it really seems like they've lost their way, and they're very really damaging their brand at this point, where they're adding bag fees, where they're moving to, like you said, choose your own seat, which they did. The reason that they always did the choose your own seat was they said that that actually made the process of boarding faster, and so they could move through and do more flights and not have to spend as much time on the ground, and so it was more profitable for them. But the bag fee thing, I continue to be perplexed by. It's like they hate their business and they're trying to actively destroy it. I really don't understand it.
It's such an interesting move because when you've built your brand around something like this, and when you've had officers in your business previously say that you're not going to change this, or changing this would cost more than it's worth, and suddenly we have something like this. I don't want to say it's a seemingly small change. I mean, of course it's going to build revenue for them, but it's going to have such an impact on their brand. I'd honestly be interested to see if they follow through with it, if it sticks. But I mean, if they proceed with this, to me, as someone who's never flown Southwest, I'm not really interested in trying them at this point. But I just, they're not an airline I think of. They're just no different than anyone else.
Well, and if the price is no different than at this point, then you're right. There is not a major difference. I still can't believe you've never flown Southwest.
Big. I mean, when you live, so close to such a major United hub, that they're just kind of the number one airline. Plus, I like using my United benefits too, so I don't want to lose
Well,
access
yes.
to my United club, or my free bags that I already get with United, just to try an airline like Southwest. Of course, I could try Frontier or Spirit, but I know better than to do that.
Yeah, I don't think
I have flown Frontier, but it's
I've flown
not to
Frontier
like
too,
totally
not
throw
Spirit.
them. Yeah, it's not to throw them under the bus. It just goes back to there's no differentiation between these airlines other than uh, price at this point. Now, of
Hmm.
course, every airline's
Feels
going to
like a
have their
familiar
benefits.
conversation, Zach, from what we've had before about some industries that we work in.
I
But
know. Well, that's
yes.
why when I said I almost mistook it for speed and price, I kind of laughed a little bit there, because obviously it's not quite the same thing. Airlines are not competing on speed, but well, I guess maybe on
I
time
mean,
arrivals
it,
kind of are. But
yeah.
I feel like that just goes back to the broader customer experience. Do we have problems
Hmm.
within our network that are causing these delays? And look at us, Gabe, the two airline executives now. But that's actually not what we want to talk about this week. One of the big things that also happened this week, though, Gabe, was you downloaded an app that just a week ago we talked about the customer experience at McDonald's and how you can use the touchscreens or you can use the app. And as of this week, you are officially a McDonald's app user.
I know. I feel like I texted you immediately after as soon as I did it, and I was like, big news. But yeah, so the quick story on this is my son won an award at school yesterday. So I was like, hey, good job. That's awesome. and I wanted to get him a little something. So I decided that I was going to get him a chocolate milkshake from McDonald's, but I forgot my wallet. And because I very rarely take my wallet, especially when I'm just running to pick him up from school. So I was like, oh crap, what am I going to do? Do I really have to drive home and get the wallet and then go to McDonald's and do the thing? I was like, you know what? Zach told me that there's an app. I'll bet I can just download it really quick, make my order. And sure enough, not only made the order, I didn't even have to go in to pick it up. I could still drive through the drive-through to get it, just have to tell them the little code, and I was off. I'm on my way. And yeah, it was a lovely customer experience. So I don't know that it's going to increase my McDonald's consumption. Hopefully not, because I technically didn't even get
Well, now
anything.
you have points on the app, I'm sure.
It's
So
true. Yes.
they're gonna keep. Well, now when you go back for that next milkshake, you'll have the points. So maybe it's like an incentive system too for your kids, Gabe. Keep doing well in school, and someday this McDonald's app will be yours. But
I like it. That sounds good.
no, so that's some of our 2 customer experience updates for the week here. But the main part of the episode today is not on Southwest Airlines and it's not on McDonald's. It's on the Thin Mint Frosty at Wendy's. No, it is on a book, Gabe, that you have recently read. And I think the best part about this book was you were so excited when you started reading it, but I got the sense that that vibe has changed a little bit.
It's been a very tedious book to read, and the book is called How to Make People Buy, and it's a very interesting book, and I have learned a lot from the book, but it has been a very tedious and boring read. And I said to you, Zach, as we were prepping for this, like, why do business books have to be so boring? And it just drives me crazy sometimes because the concepts are interesting, but sometimes the writing is just so dry. And I've had this book with me, it's sitting over here on my desk, but I've had it the last few trips that I've done, and I've been trying to read it. And my goodness, it has just been a tedious read. But I am again very excited about some of the concepts and excited about some of the things that I learned through the book that we're going to talk about today. But why do you think business books have to be so boring? Like, what are we doing to ourselves? Can we just have a little bit of fun?
Man, I thought even like my business textbooks in college were pretty exciting. So I'm going to check this book out, Gabe, and let you know my thoughts as well. But I kind of like one of these topics here you had mentioned, Gabe, and that is trends change, tactics change, generations change, but what doesn't change is our brain. And I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's just, there's, again, the trends that we see in the world, the tactics that we use, what social media platforms we're advertising on, all those things change pretty frequently. Sometimes even within a few months, certainly within a couple of years. But the fundamental structures of our brain and how we interact with the world really doesn't change very much at all. And that's why I loved learning a little bit more about this, because a lot of these fundamental things of how our brain thinks, reacts, acts, that drives our body and drives our body, or drives our consumer behavior. If we understand that better, we're going to be much better marketers and sellers, because again, those things don't change. The actual fundamental structures of our brain doesn't change that frequently.
Hey, my brain is just like freshly, fully developed, Gabe. So this is what a great topic to have.
It actually was interesting because they did talk about that, kind of the development process of the brain, and how, and I mean, really until your early 20s, it's really not even fully developed. So it is interesting. Zach, the other part that I thought was interesting was how much energy it takes for us to make decisions. And one of the things that was talked about in the book is that the brain makes up only 2% of our body weight, but it actually consumes 25% of the body's energy. And so the more the brain has to work, the costlier it is, and the more frustrated we become as consumers. And this is something that you and I talk about frequently, but it really goes to show you why simplicity in your marketing and simplicity in the way that you're explaining your products and services is so important. Because again, if we're having to use a lot of energy in thinking through what it is that this company is trying to sell us, it's going to make us frustrated, and it's going to make us not want to actually buy that thing.
This goes back to the bits and bytes conversation. When you're buying the internet, everyone has some form of connected lifestyle, but Again, do we know what bits and bytes best apply to that lifestyle? No, we don't. So, Gabe, I feel like that's just exactly what we've been talking about lately on the podcast is understanding, what your customers are trying to buy, what your prospects are trying to buy. And then, of course, as the consumer, there is nothing more frustrating than going out to a website and trying to buy a product or service that you have to decipher.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other problem on top of that is distraction is a real problem. We get so much thrown at us on a day-to-day basis. So much advertising, so much marketing is just thrown at us every single day that if you're going to be a successful marketer, it's so important to understand how to cut through that noise.
You have to
And
stand out.
that's exactly. And you have to not get lost in the shuffle too. It's not even sometimes it's not even necessarily about standing out. It's just making small tweaks. Zach, we're going to talk about one of these small things that people can do a little bit later on in the podcast. But again, sometimes it can just be, small modifications. And I love the scientific aspect of being able to understand why people are doing the things that they're doing and some of the case studies and all of that was discussed in the book.
Gabe, I think of every time we think of how much noise there is in marketing, I just go back to the best example I can think of is, how many of us have scrolled through Facebook today or scrolled through Twitter and X and Instagram? What was the last post you saw? Or what was the last ad you saw even? And Gabe, the last tweet I saw, I'll send it to you later today, but it's of course it's finance and Excel related, but it just goes back to there's so much content that we are consuming as consumers. That's a terrible sentence, but we're consuming so much content that you really do have to cut through some of this noise. And Gabe, you mentioned some best practices, but you also mentioned in this book there's some key tests. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about those.
Yeah, so there were kind of some key terms and key ways that they're actually identifying, well, what is the brain doing when you're looking at an ad or when you're making a purchase. And so some of these key terms just to think about that were discussed a lot in the book. Neuromarketing, which is that's sort of, I think that's the first time I'd really heard that term, but I thought it was very interesting thinking about marketing in the context of neuroscience. And then the other one that was used a lot was consumer neuroscience. And I thought that was another really interesting way to describe this. And what a lot of these folks are doing who are doing this research is they're running these studies, and the way that they determine, again, what somebody's engaging with is they actually use eye tracking technology. Zach, you mentioned you actually did this a little bit in college. I'd be very curious to hear what that looks like. But
Yeah, and
that sounded so interesting to me.
yeah, so in college, we did it specifically with we did a couple use cases. Number one, we did ads, and then the second one, Gabe, I don't want to throw a date on anyone here, but we were talking about how when you apply for jobs, your resumes are, no one really looks at them anymore, right? It's all
It's
digital, and
interesting.
a lot of companies are using AI to scan these resumes and whatnot. But we talked about how back in the day, eye tracking technology was used. So, like, if you were looking at a physical copy of a resume
Mm,
to see where people went. And the same applies to ads. If we publish an ad, a print ad, a social ad, wherever we're publishing content, where are people spending time? Gabe, one of the best practices we've shared, because I have to talk about this now, is tools like Clarity, Hotjar, having those heat maps on your website. These are
yes.
kind of similar in the sense that it's going to show you where people are spending time on your website and give you insights into how they're interacting with your website. So, me, I'm just a big fan of eye tracking, heat mapping, all of these technologies in marketing.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I had the exact same thought when I was reading through a lot of the eye tracking technology piece. So with eye tracking technology, they're actually putting something on your face and then they're able to measure with a tremendous amount of accuracy whether
Is it
it's
an
a
Apple Vision
commercial.
Pro? Is that what they're putting on your face?
I don't know what the actual device was. They had some specific proprietary stuff I think they were using for that. That's pretty funny. Not anymore, I can tell you that, since that product's been basically destroyed. But you bring up an excellent point on the website piece of it, which is not everybody can afford to go get eye tracking technology and then hire a bunch of people to go wander around, and wandering around a physical store, or look at your website or look at your ad and then see what happens. But the digital version of this would be something like Clarity or Hotjar, so you can get a really good idea of where people are looking as you're putting this out there. So I think it's a great way for folks to do this in a much more approachable way. The other one that, again, is probably not approachable for most folks, but is the putting an EEG monitor on people.
You don't have this equipment at home,
Yeah,
like
sadly,
doesn't
no,
every
I don't.
marketer have this in their toolbox?
Yeah, so yeah, I haven't strapped up my brain with a bunch of EEG monitors to see what's going on, but that's what they do in a lot of these studies, and then they look to see what parts of the brain are quote unquote lighting up when you're making specific decisions, when you're making a buying decision, when they're trying to determine if an ad was effective or not. And all of that was just really interesting in determining, as they're going through these studies and tests, how are people actually interacting with this, what their stress level is. Zach, we're going to talk about that, I think, in a very funny way later. But there's just some really interesting things that you can see when you actually have that technology strapped to somebody's head, which is kind of wild.
That's fascinating, Gabe.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And how deep they can go in your brain with those EEGs and some of the other things that they were doing to really understand not only how's your brain reacting, but what specific parts of your brain were reacting when people were seeing ads. So the first one, Zach, that I wanted to talk about here was this test that they did for Valspar, which is a paint company. So this was one where they brought people into a large store, I'm assuming probably like a Lowe's or a Home Depot or something like that, wherever people buy paint, maybe an Ace Hardware. And they broke they broke people up into two groups. One group was shown a series of ads when they were coming in, and that included an ad for Valspar paint, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And then there was a whole nother group that was the control group that wasn't shown any of those ads. And then they sent people out into the store, and they had all this eye tracking technology on them, and EEG tracking technology on them, and things like that. And they watched them kind of go around the store. And ultimately they told them, you need to purchase some paint. And so they went to the paint aisle and they measured where people were looking in the paint aisle and things like that. The people who saw the Valspar ad lingered significantly longer on the Valspar area of the paint options. And 91% of people who made a purchase ended up purchasing Valspar as the product. And what I thought was really interesting about this is that the majority of the participants didn't even recall having seen the ad.
I think that's just super fascinating. Like,
I know,
we're seeing the message, and perhaps we're not actively thinking about that as we're shopping.
Yes.
But when I saw that, Gabe, I immediately thought of, okay, me as a consumer, how many times have I fallen victim to this, walking into the grocery store or Lowe's, Home Depot, these places to buy something, and then walking out, or again spending time even looking at a particular brand. I'm like more than confident I've been guilty of this, and probably all consumers, of course, seeing this data on this paint example. But I thought that was fascinating to see.
I thought that was such an interesting part of it too, is that they felt like their choices were their own. There was a subconscious aspect of, that ad being seen, not even necessarily thinking about it, but then as they're going through and making that purchasing decision, they were lingering longer on that product, and again, purchased at a much higher rate than the folks who didn't see that ad. So that the takeaway from me here is, okay, so advertising works great. Like, I think we all kind of have an idea that that's the case. But, Zach, working in our industry, we hear a lot that, well, we don't need to market as aggressively in the areas that we serve because our customers know who we are. We're the local provider, those sorts of things. I would push back against that because there is something called more exposure effect. I always thought this was mere exposure effect, and apparently I've been saying it wrong, and it's actually more exposure effect. So now I feel like an idiot. But there is this concept of more exposure effect. It's why Coca-Cola spends billions of dollars a year on advertising. They're already a massive brand, but they want, whenever you're thinking about a soda, they want you to think of Coke, right? And the same thing is true, I think, for any business. If you aren't getting your message out there consistently in front of your customers, then when it's time to make that buying decision, they're just not going to think about you.
And I think the big thing too, Gabe, if you're not actively doing this, your competition probably is, or they might be doing this. So keeping your brand front and centered. Gabe, we've talked a lot about the buyer journey, going from acquisition to retention to loyalty, all this fun stuff. We've always said that you can't acquire a customer and just fall off. You have to keep your brand front and center. You have to stay in touch with the people buying your products and services, or the people who might be interested in buying your products and services. At the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, we talked about Southwest, talked about United. Um, I United's interesting because like I don't fly, like every day. I'm not quite like you, Gabe, crossing the country every week, but I still get marketing messages from them, and it keeps them top of mind. I mentioned that I'm next to a Southwest hub as well. I don't think I've ever seen a marketing message from Southwest. Maybe a few on social media, but everything I know about them is through the news as well. So I'd be interested to know, as companies start doing these ad placements, if it slowly starts to build up inside, my head over time
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
when that purchase decision comes.
Yep, absolutely. I'm so glad you said front and center because it leads me so beautifully into my next point here, Zach, which is something that was discussed a lot in the book called the corner of death. And this is another piece that I thought was really interesting. So what they did is they measured where people are looking at in specific ads, and they went through thousands of these tests using eye tracking technology to see where people were looking at on a specific ad. Content in the lower right hand corner is seen at a rate of 0 to 4%. So it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that if you are slapping your logo or any content that you think should be interesting in the bottom right hand corner of an ad, it is very unlikely that your customers are seeing it.
And what's surprising, Gabe, here is the amount of ads with the logo in that corner.
Yeah. So almost 50%, 48% of ads that this team analyzed in the book had the logo in the bottom right hand corner. So not only do people not see it, but almost the majority of companies out there are slapping their logo in the bottom right hand corner of an ad. I'm sure I've been guilty of this as we're creating ads for our customers and things like that. I'm sure that I have put logos in the bottom right hand corner. So that is one big takeaway for me from this book is avoid the corner of death. And the good news is that if you do avoid the corner of death, you're likely going to be a heck of a lot better off than nearly 50% of the companies that are out there, because a vast majority of people are still slapping that logo in the corner of death.
Well, now we just spilled that secret, Gabe.
I know. Well, hopefully none of our customers, competitors listen to this podcast.
Well, the last topic here, Gabe, I laughed when I saw this for a couple of reasons, but
I wrote this specifically just for you, Zach.
Being in the broadband industry, I think this is just I don't know if I want to say a phenomenal, fantastic, or frustrating test, but Gabe, talk to me about buffering and stress. And when I say buffering, I think we have to be very clear that we're not trying to relate this podcast to stress, but Gabe, tell us about this.
Yeah, so I have to read the topic out that I wrote here, Zach, because this is what made you laugh so hard. So what I wrote here was buffering creates the stress of a horror movie, and Zach had a good laugh when he saw that.
I mean, we probably thought that around connections, trying to plan our buffering episodes, but true. I would hope the podcast isn't too stressful for our listeners.
No, hopefully people are listening to the lovely tones of our voices and just having a wonderful time. But
yeah, and avoiding the corner of death.
Exactly, and avoiding the corner of death. So one of the things that's discussed a lot in the book is how buying decisions create stress and how different situations create stress. And it talked a lot about like when you're watching a horror movie, and which I hate horror movies, so I don't watch those.
I love them. I'm sorry, but I really do.
I know you're a fan, Zach. But when you're watching a horror movie, your heart rate elevates, and your body's having a reaction to the stress of the movie, even though you're not in any real danger. Your body's still reacting in a way because you're scared. So the test that they ran, it made me laugh because I just felt like this was so diabolical. So they ran a test with a bunch of people for a large telecommunications provider. And what they did was they actually manipulated how much delay people had in their interactions with the internet. So they would tell them to go watch a YouTube video, and part of the group had no delay. It just was immediate. They click on it, it would pop up, no buffering, no problem. Another group would have some delay where it may, take a little minute to load. And another group would have a massive delay where the video would take a very long time to load. It would play for a few seconds and then it would get the buffering spinny wheel of death. And I thought that was hilarious that they were doing that to mess with people. But the results and the stress response piece of it were super interesting.
If I would have been a part of this study, Gabe, I really hope I was not in the group that was being impacted by the added buffering, because isn't that just the worst? And I always think back to, not to like take us too off topic, but like whenever there's like live streamed events, um, I'm guilty of having one stream on my TV and like maybe one on my laptop or on my phone, or maybe my friends are watching at their place too. But when there's a delay between the two, my goodness, buffering creates stress.
Well, we're coming up on two of I think the greatest streaming events of the year. The NCAA basketball tournament, which
March
is
Madness. Oh
fantastic.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Gotta love March Madness. And they were really early on with putting all of that content online and for free, where you could watch multiple streams. So uh, back in the day, this was pre-kids for me. I had a buddy, and we would always take those couple of days off, those first couple of days of the tournament off of work, and we would just literally sit on the couch and have like 4 screens, maybe even 5 screens up at one time, and we would be streaming all of the content. Those were good times. And then the other one that I really love that has done a fantastic job with this is the Masters. They do such a good job of getting the content out there for free, getting it, making it broadly available for people to stream. So anyway, two of my favorite streaming things of the year coming up
In addition to buffering,
well, yes, of course,
the podcast. We gotta
yes.
we gotta draw that line.
Yeah, no, we gotta clarify. So to go back to the study, so they created this experience where it was creating stress for people who were seeing buffering. Pages wouldn't load, things were taking forever, and they measured the stress response. And what they also measured was how that stress response resulted in negative consequences for the brands that were associated with that experience. And what they measured was a 30% drop in brand valuation for those people who had those negative experiences. And as I thought about like what this means for our industry, unfortunately, we do work in an industry with really high expectations. The expectation for broadband service providers is extremely high. And people tend to not think and remember the 99.9% of the time where your service worked great. They tend to focus on the 0.1% of the time where the service didn't work great. And I think, unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast in the industry.
It's a very high reliability industry.
Correct. And we notice when something like that happens most of the time. So, it does create a situation where the quality of the service, and we're lucky to work with a lot of broadband service providers who provide amazing service to their customers. But it does, when you hear something like that, where, you can have a 30% drop in brand valuation just because of these negative experiences, if they're associated with your brand, it really does remind me how much time and effort and work needs to go into building a high quality network. Great. So many of our customers have done that. Building a high quality Wi-Fi experience. Again, great. I think so many of our customers have done that. But also analyzing the data and making sure that on an ongoing basis, you're doing everything you can to make sure that your customer is right sized into the appropriate service. Whether that's like, I use this example for myself all the time. When I originally bought my broadband service, I was subscribed to 4 less streaming services. I wasn't working from home. I didn't have kids with gaming systems. My life has changed dramatically over 5 or 6 years. I have a whole separate part of my house now that I work in that, if I didn't have a mesh unit out here, would not be covered well with Wi-Fi. So looking at that data, it's not, Zach, I'm sure you hear this all the time too. Like, our customers feel like they don't want to be intrusive to their customers. And to me, it's not being intrusive. It's trying to be proactive about the type of support that you can deliver.
I think that's spot on, Gabe. There's in the industry, there's a lot of data you can use to improve your customer's experience. And I think of this as two ways. One is You can sit around and wait for a problem or wait for a customer to cancel, or you can be proactive. You can identify any issues a customer might be having, especially after you've acquired a customer. What better time to make sure your customer is satisfied and has that positive experience? And then again, going on throughout that customer journey, right? We have this customer. How can we keep them happy? Let's use the data. And Gabe, I think you just walked us through a great example. Me, I've been working from home now for a few years as well. I still have the same Xbox, the same streaming services, but your life has changed quite significantly. And would you say that your broadband needs have changed? Absolutely.
Yes, but never have I been contacted by my provider offering me any type of different service
And this
that would
that goes
provide
into
me
my
a
next
better
question.
experience.
And again, it's tough because we're in the industry. I know you've got that additional mesh unit because where else would you get that from? But if your provider reached out throughout these life changes, you'd be interested in taking them up on that offer, looking to improve your lifestyle with your connected home.
Yeah, I knew that I needed additional coverage. But again, Zach, we're weirdos who work in this industry, and we're we're at the upper, the highest group of people that are going to sort of understand this for the most part. So I knew that I had to go do that on my own. Most people don't understand that. They're just going to be like, such and such service sucks because I don't have Wi-Fi out of my new outdoor office that didn't even exist when this home was built, right? Or when I signed up for the service. But again, people don't think about it like that. So
It's
I
actually
guess that.
I was gonna
Sorry,
say
go
it's
ahead,
it's
Zach.
just to add on to this. It's funny that we have this conversation because, when I think of outdoor Wi-Fi, initially I was like, "Is this a problem?" Like when we talk about outdoor Wi-Fi, it was never really something I was interested in. Now, once I set up my outdoor Wi-Fi and I was able to, keep my smart sprinklers connected, or one of the big things too is I'll often use my phone when I'm parked either in my garage or in my driveway as I prepare to leave, so I'm not on my phone when I'm driving. But
Hmm.
that's often when the Wi-Fi signal is the worst. You're far away from your access point, you're outside. Having that outdoor access point totally resolved that situation. So, we talk about your technology needs, we talk about mine is I had this pain point between my IoT devices and, being able to use my phone in my driveway. That problem has been resolved. Of course, my broadband provider didn't reach out, but again, being the techie person I am,
Yeah,
resolved a
you went and
problem
figured out
I
how to solve it
didn't
yourself.
fully understand I have.
Hmm. It's such a great point about the outdoor and the. I have the exact same experience when I'm in the driveway or I'm pulling out of the garage and I'm trying to, you know, get get Spotify connected or get directions to go somewhere or whatever, and I'm at the edge of Wi-Fi and so my phone doesn't work very well. It would really be great to have something to solve that problem. But it's again looking at the data, looking at those situations where people would be being stressed, right? Where their brain is working too hard. To bring this back to the beginning of the conversation, if our brain has to work too hard, we're going to get stressed and frustrated. And it's a great opportunity for any business to proactively reach out, identify these situations in a proactive way, and then look to solve a real customer problem and reduce that level of stress versus increase it.
Well, Gabe, what's the next book on the reading list?
I don't know, man. I gotta figure out what the next one is. Hopefully, it's not as boring as this one. Like I said, it was a tough read. I wish some of these business books were a little bit more exciting. I am glad I read it. It was very interesting. There were definitely some good takeaways. Certainly the corner of death thing I thought was so interesting, especially with nearly 50% of ads that they looked at being having that logo in the bottom right hand corner. But business writers out there, can we write some more exciting business books for goodness sake?
Well, hopefully we made the topic a little bit more exciting, but thank you everyone for tuning into Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on LinkedIn.